Welcome back to the Optimized Equine Podcast. Today I'm joined by McKrell Baier of the United States Equestrian Society and Daniel Dauphin of Dauphin Horsemanship. I've had the pleasure of speaking with McKrell a couple of times before, so I would encourage you to get to know more about her, the USES, as well as the Bridge Up Giddy Up program in episodes 14 and 17. Daniel Dauphin is an educator, horse trainer, and clinician who founded the BIT course, an educational resource incorporated into multiple university programs and endorsed by top names in the equine industry. He also hosts the Adult Onset Horsemanship podcast, where he brings his unique blend of humor to important and thorough conversations about all aspects of horsemanship. I'm a big fan of his podcast, and I would highly recommend checking it out. In this conversation, we're diving into one of the most critical conversations facing our equestrian community, protecting our social license to operate. For those unfamiliar with the term, social license to operate refers to the ongoing acceptance and approval of our equestrian lifestyle by the broader public. It's something many of us took for granted until recent years, but it's now under increasing scrutiny. McKrell and Daniel bring two different but equally important perspectives to this discussion. We tackle some tough questions, such as, does defending the horse world as is actually serve our horse's best interests? How do we balance the need for education and improvement with protecting our lifestyle from extremist groups? Before we dive in, I want to be clear. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about having an honest conversation about where we are, where we need to go, and how we get there together. Whether you're a weekend trail rider or a professional trainer, this conversation affects all of us who share our lives with horses. With that, I hope you enjoy the show.
Here we go.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I am sure we are going to have plenty to chat about, so we're going to dive right in. I brought us together today to talk about equine welfare and the future of the equestrian lifestyle, among other things, of course. I think non-horse people notice maybe that we use different tack and wear different outfits. But a lot of non-horse people, otherwise, they don't realize how unique and, in my opinion, how divided we really all are. And so I think that's something that we should all be talking about and thinking about because of the social license to operate. That is a term that I was not familiar with until I started talking with McKrell about it a little more. What I was familiar with was animal extremist groups trying to cause problems for us. And that's kind of just where I left it. And I just was like, not going to be a problem. And I also have said, I'm not competing right now. The competition world is a hot mess. Go ahead, take horse shows away. I don't care. And I kind of just left it there until McKrell helped me think about it a little more and a little differently. So, McKrell, can you tell us a little bit about SLO, or social license to operate, and why, from your perspective, all equestrians should be concerned about preserving it? And then maybe Daniel can jump in after that and tell us what he would like to add, or if he has a different perspective entirely.
Sure. So I think what you started off by saying is that we get kind of siloed in our own little worlds of equestrianism. And I mean, the thing that all of them have in common is that they require an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of overhead, expenditure, lifestyle adjustment, right? So I think that, what you started off by saying is that is true in my experience as well, but mostly because our lifestyles and our work are so overwhelmingly exhausting, just in general, because we choose to be horse people. My particular experience is that I imported and married a European horse person. And for that reason, I've been privy for many decades now to the conversation on this side of the pond, but also on the other side of the pond. And as we all know, Europe tends to have far more regulation around horse things and everything generally. Hearing conversations through international conferences, seminars, symposiums, trainings, clinics, competitions over this period of years has just given us a unique perspective to see what is different, what's happening differently on both sides of the Europe and the Americas, and where those conversations overlap, but also where there are not conversations happening in some places versus others on this particular topic. The social license to operate, as I see it, in the equestrian ecosystem, industry, whatever you want to call it, is that in our current state of the modern world that we live in, there's much more access to information, much more access to pictures, videos, opinions, information, misinformation, that provides people without expertise to form very strong emotion-based opinions about what we all do with horses. And, I think what's important to remember is that at least the startup reason why we work with horses is for our own benefit. The sort of trickle down effect of that is that it ends up being in the horse's benefit as well, because as we know, resources are limited, space is limited. The struggle to survive in some places is very real. And if horses don't have a purpose to humanity, then resources for their well-being dry up very quickly. I think that in any industry, especially one that serves a relatively small percentage of the population, it's really important to continue to have open dialogue within the industry and across disciplines so that we can help each other see our blind spots and do a better job as experts to discuss what we can do better, what we don't know how to do better, what we can't afford to do better, so that we can create a lockstep effort for people that are not experts looking in to not only not judge us unfairly. Fair judgment is fine. I mean, we all know that there's bad apples everywhere and they need to be called out and dealt with. But we also want people from outside the horse world looking in thinking, that looks like something that's accessible to me. That looks like some place where I might be welcome and gain a huge amount of personal development. We certainly want people looking in going, wow, all those people that work so hard really do a good job for their horses, not the opposite of that. So in my mind, social license to operate is the general public's opinion about any industry ecosystem and whether it has a right to exist and to operate, and very importantly, whether it has a right to utilize resources that could be utilized in other ways. Is that enough?
Sounds great. Sounds like you've said that before, McKrell.
It feels like I have to add something onto it every time because I have been so fortunate to have a lot of conversation and gain a lot of other people's perspectives, which is the way that we actually can make a difference together, and why I'm so excited to be on this call with Daniel today, and you, of course.
So, Daniel, what are your thoughts? Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, like you, the social license to operate concept is relatively new to me. I am by nature a more analytical person, so the emotional side of things that people tend toward, and when they come to us with the more emotional arguments, that's not natural to me. And so I tend to combat that stuff with facts and logic, stuff that's pretty hard to argue with. One of the things that is factual and logical about this social license to operate is that we do have people that go out in public, or I mean, public's kind of everywhere now, right? Everybody has a video recorder and an internet connection in their pocket, so you pretty well need to plan on you're being recorded at any moment in time at this point. And we have people that have done unfortunate things, been caught, sometimes fortunately, sometimes unfortunately, and then that gets out into the wild. So I think we do have a responsibility among ourselves to make better choices, to be more aware, and to not put things like that out there. But I also think we have let go of control of this conversation, and we do have an enemy in this sense. They are incredibly well funded and well organized and far more radical and counter to what we value and want than we tend to recognize. And we do a very poor job of recognizing that we're in a fight and treating it like we're in a fight. And I think if we continue down that path, we may not have an industry at all in 10 or 15 years at the rate it's declining right now. So we do have an interior responsibility, but we also have an exterior foe. And I think we kind of have a two-front battle there.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. It is a two-front battle, and it's I think it's going to be too easy for us to be fighting amongst ourselves and miss some big shit happening, which is why I want to have this conversation.
On that note, I had a really interesting conversation, actually a conversation over the last 4 weeks or so, maybe even 6 weeks, with someone who's been a lifelong equestrian major industry professional in California for a long time. And one of the things that I was ignorant to on the facts analysis side of things until just now was that so many extremist groups, as in any political arena, what they say they're fighting for is actually not really the impetus for the resources that get put behind that fight, right? So as an example, race courses have found themselves under extreme pressure from animal rights groups. And that's not to say that everything is perfect in racing, not by a long shot, but the real push to win those battles for the animal extremist groups was actually not about doing better by the animals. It was for gaining control of the land, for housing developments and retail developments and things that would bring in more money. So generally speaking, we always have to follow the money to understand where the power behind these fights comes from. And so a major thing that I've really started thinking about is trying to educate myself better, not just be equestrian ecosystem focused, but understand the larger political ecosystem better, so that, to Daniel's point, the analysis, the analytics, and the economics of these decisions are extremely important to understand internally, as we discuss, and also externally when we go to, which I think is one of the main points I wanted to make today. I feel that very carefully, we have to start to bring those external warring factions together and start having conversations to either figure out what they want to see us do differently, whether or not that can be done is a different story, and or really suss out what are the real reasons behind these arguments.
So far we have, I think, all at some point said the word fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, on one hand, it is an important fight. And to save all of this that we've been talking about is worth fighting for. On the other hand, I would also have said in some scenarios, we can't fight. Like, that is not going to get us anywhere. It just keeps us divided. So I'll dive into this for Daniel here for a moment. So I've consumed quite a few hours of your podcast, which makes this actually a little unfair. This is not the first time it's been this way, where I'm like, yeah, I know all this stuff about you. Nice to meet you. But anyway, I've consumed quite a bit of your podcast. Everyone should check it out. The Adult Onset Horsemanship Podcast. Anyway, so many times I hear you talk about your frustration with these self-appointed equine welfare police. Maybe that's not the word you used, but that's what I'll call them, who seem to just have a non-stop stream of complaints about how bad horses are being treated. But from your perspective, horses these days have it better than they've ever had. I wouldn't disagree with you there, certainly, but I also think that emphasizing this downplays how much work there really is to be done. And I think it kind of gives the people in the horse world something, it gives them an excuse. It also, Daniel, you had Dave Duquette of Western Justice on episode 60 and 61 of your podcast. I think what they're doing is really important. There's definitely a need for their mission, but I do think the theme of his responses to things is kind of the same. It doesn't address any changes that do need to happen. So in your situation, you're a bit specialist, clinician. I know you're working with all kinds of people from different backgrounds, different levels, all of that stuff. And I know you're teaching people to communicate with their horses on a very fine-tuned level, to the point, like with bits, where Daniel is going to talk to you about feeling your horse's lips, okay? And I would say that there is a lot of Western disciplines where that is not at all happening, certainly English as well. But I know it's pretty uncommon to come across people that are already operating with their horses in this way. Do you feel like the misuse of a bit qualifies as abuse, for one? And for two, do you feel like not addressing what we do need to do adds fuel to the fire for people who already think they're doing good enough when, quite frankly, they are not? So, can I hear your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. To your first point about, do I think misuse of a bit is abuse? To me, this is a very important point. Abuse is a word that denotes an extreme. There is a spectrum here, and there's a shallow end of the pool and a deep end of the pool, and abuse is the deep end of the pool. So we're really talking about the degree of misuse. So could misuse of a bit be abuse? 100% it could. Could we also characterize misuse of a bit as a person doing the best that they know how to do, but they're just unskilled at this point? Maybe their balance isn't good. They have some things to learn. They just aren't communicating well with the horse, and we could educate them and solve all of these problems in a period of time once they've developed the skills. I don't think you can characterize that as abuse. It is something that could be improved upon, but it's a 2 out of 10, not an 8 out of 10. And that's where I think we get really, really loose with some of these words and throw them out. You brought up, McKrell, about Europe. There was a paper published recently. I think it was for the British Horse Society. It might not have been, but something like that. And it was on the crisis. That's a very inflammatory, emotional word in horse welfare. And my contention is that there has never been a time in the history of the planet, never been a better time to be a horse than right now. And we know more about them. We have more. So where's the crisis? Which is not to say there are not things that can be improved upon. There are always going to be bad actors, but there are bad actors in the medical field, the legal field, plumbers. That's just humanity. A certain percentage of the population sucks, and we have some of them in the horse business too. But to paint the whole industry as in crisis because of one unfortunate video shared on social media, it's hyperbolic. It gets to a point of absurdity sometimes. We're now removing some horse events from the Olympics, and this is one that I like to pick on a lot. We had the situation in the Olympics in Japan a few Olympics ago where I think it was a German pentathlete had the horse that was balking, and she was going to win the whole thing, and now because the horse she got balking, and the coach reaches in and slaps the horse on the butt, and the world lost their mind over this. And my contention is, yes, that was unfortunate. It was definitely wrong. The coach should not have interfered. But if we use a little common sense, that horse was clearly in the sympathetic nervous system. It was full of adrenaline and cortisol. The coach hit it like that hard. The horse didn't even feel what the person did in reality. If you took that same horse, untacked it, turned it out in a corral with some other horses, I promise it's about to be kicked or something much harder than what that lady did to the horse in the Olympics. That gives us a black eye. It is unfortunate. It looks bad. In reality, absolutely nothing long-term or problematic really happened to the horse. It would have, a Shetland pony would do much more damage to it in turnout than what that person did right then and there. So I think keeping that matter of scope, just because something bad happens doesn't mean that something horrific that needs to change the world happened. You can have unfortunate and it not be a crisis. I was talking with another clinician on my podcast about this, and the basic principle I kind of hear, and you kind of espoused it in this question too, is misuse of something abuse? For a living, I work with people who are doing the best that they can, but they're kind of making a mess of things, and that's why they need help. and we're trying to improve things. And I don't think that in any way can you characterize people doing the best they can and making what are really relatively minor mistakes as abuse or cruel or criminal. They're not the kinds of things that need to change an industry or have cataclysmic type effects. We have multiple examples in the horse world where we have aimed at one problem to solve it, and the cure wind up being far worse than the disease ever was. And so I think some logical, common sense views need to be taken. And I think that has to be specific to the group within. I don't think we can expect those non-horse people looking at us in that social license to operate aspect to recognize all this and to become educated and understand what's going on. But certainly we should uphold that standard within our own ranks, even between disciplines and things like that. And I think we're doing a very poor job of it with the group of people that should understand.
Is it okay if I jump in with there just for a minute, Tamara? So I think it's really, really interesting what you said, Daniel. And I think my perspective is not just as a horse trainer, but also as a anthropologist, which is what I had some training for in university. What constantly comes into conversations with non-horse people that I have opportunity to engage with, and I think just society in general tends to be much more sympathetic in their outlook on animals being used than they ever were before, because we have so much fewer people with horse knowledge because we haven't required horses to sustain us for so long, right? I think with the advent of engines in cars, it changed things a lot. And so where the general sort of consensus of horse knowledge was much higher at a different point in time, now it is quite low, generally speaking, together with the growth of humanity's sensitivities towards other viewpoints. And, some things that couldn't be talked about before are now commonplace. So everything just changes over time. And with respect to the German pentathlete, I could equate what happened as really a bad temper tantrum on the rider's part. It's like you said, the horse in the sympathetic nervous system, but the rider also, because it was just a really bad situation. Pentathlon riders are not expert riders. This is not, they are not the quality of equestrian that you would see in any other discipline, because with very few exceptions, they have to, run and shoot and do all these other things. It's really hard to get pentathletes to learn how to ride. Generally, they come in with the other skill sets first. I think that particular instance is, and I'll get to the broader perspective about it in just a moment, but that particular instance was a non-Olympic caliber horseman, just because that's what pentathletes generally are. Generally speaking, I know because I know someone that coached them for years here in the U.S., is now in the fight and flight state themselves, the horse is. And it was basically a temper tantrum, the same way that a tennis player might throw their racket on the court,
Sure.
in an Olympic match when there's a bad call. That's what it looked like to me. The problem with the masses' perspective on that is that horse didn't have a choice to participate in that event. And so that scenario, not to say that horse doesn't have a better life being a pentathlon horse than it would somewhere else, but that is the perception. And same to, the Erin Ballard scandal now. The Canadian Equestrian of the Year, that whole award givings has been paused because she had to do more or less the same to try to bring this horse across the start line because it was balking and it didn't want to go. And all of these things stem from within our own industry, because there's tremendous pressure as a professional rider to take a horse and fix it in the moment on the horse show grounds, get it across the finish line, give it a better experience from a situation where it has not, been succeeding. And when those things are caught on camera, in the case of Erin Ballard, my question continues to be, why didn't the judge blow her out of the arena? That's the rule. But sometimes, we let the rules go a little bit because you go, God, that's a really difficult situation. She doesn't want to be doing that. The horse, somebody's paid or whatever. All of these are very complex things. But at the root of it, what I see, and I'm interested to know, Daniel, from your perspective in your discipline, the people that you work with, in our scenario in the dressage and jumping world specifically, there are far less skilled riders competing at much higher levels than ever before in the past. And that has to do with the pay to play model. And it has to do with the economic pressures of our sport, which are pushing the very best horsemen in the world out of the competitive sport and allowing very rich amateurs to participate at a level far greater than has ever been done before. That does not mean that that's always going to be bad pictures. But what it does mean is that there's the potential for a lot of horses that would normally be going around very big classes with very skilled horse people, professionals, if you will, that are now going around with amateurs that have accelerated their performance through the ability to be able to pay. And the problem in that regard is that the United States model for commercial horse shows is now taking over the entire world. And these are major things that have to be dealt with within our industries. And we have to have a lockstep mentality about how we're going to talk about that on an external scale so that we're not making the whole situation worse, which is, I think, a little bit to your point as well. What is happening in the Western industry with general education and capability in riders as a general?
So that brings up a couple of things. One, and I'm taking some notes here, I hope y'all don't mind, but you brought up that the rider was essentially having a temper tantrum. I agree. What I'm saying is that when John McEnroe had a temper tantrum and broke his racket, nobody said let's end tennis. And that's what's happening now. One person had a bad day and did regrettable things, and this social license to operate is wanting to be pulled from everyone for it. And ultimately, what the person did was, minor in the scope of a horse. The next point, and I think this is where we're not controlling the conversation well, I hear this a lot, that the horse doesn't have a choice to participate. The horse exercised their choice right there on camera at the Olympics in the ring. The horse definitely had a choice. It wasn't the one that the rider wanted it to make. But if that horse wasn't in the bubble that it's in and it was just a horse out in a pasture, it also wouldn't have a choice when the mountain lion came up or the wolf or whatever may have happened. A lot of people use Mustangs as kind of the holy grail of what a horse should be. The average age of the average Mustang in the U.S. is 8. There are no 30-year-old Mustangs out there. On average, they live to be 8. So I understand the horse may not have a choice in the way that we think of it, but the reality is they exercise their choices all the time. And if a horse walks multiple times at big events, he's about to not be a big event horse anymore. He's going to have a different job, a different life, a different whatever. And so I think those things are a little more, they're kind of staring at the tree when we need to back up and look at the forest. And I know that's a lot to ask of the non-horse public, but for the people in the horse business, my background was in cutting horses. I have started north of 1,000 horses. I've worked with thousands more problem horses and all of that. I've come across a lot of horses that didn't fit the mold that person wanted them to fit, and we find another job, another task. That's because the horse doesn't want to do it. This is not a world stopping sort of a thing that happens all the time. And then we make the best of the bad situation in whatever way that we can. So I just think that kind of measured, take a step back, take a deep breath. Let's be a little more rational about this situation. A rider having a temper tantrum shouldn't end riding in the Olympics. That's that, overreaction in this social license to operate world. To your point on the amateur that can now essentially go buy an F1 car and compete with the pros on the big boy racetrack. I do try to look at the industry as a whole. the reality is the horses we tend to think about, the sport horses, the performance horse world, the show horses, the horses in the high level rodeo stuff, they're actually a pretty small part of the picture of the horse population in general. About 65% of all of the horses are backyard horses, trail riders. There's no levels to what they do. The pressure cooker isn't on. There's no money on the line. That's just people that own a horse that want to enjoy it. Um, and again, so we are making mass decisions based upon individual acts in aspects that are but a fraction of the whole. And I think we have to consider that all the time. This is just an individual, a small problem.
One thing that's not a small problem, that has very much, Europe has a longer history with horses, does not mean that it does not come with major issues today, right? So one of the most critical issues in dressage, and really in the Olympic equestrian disciplines altogether, is hyperflexion and roll cour, right? And what happens with famous people defending practices such as roll cour, and those things then, to your point, Tamara, of saying, you know what, this horse wouldn't be a competition horse if we didn't ride him low, deep, and round like this with the chin on the chest, because this is helping us solve this thing. And the general human population and those that aren't so, educated, expert equestrians as us just can't understand. What we're telling you is that this is necessary. And so now huge swaths of people use that training method. The same way that, people who decided that the horses would be way better to ride in whatever discipline it was by tying them with very tight side reins in the stalls at the horse shows before they went, so they're just physically exhausted, or lunge them for whatever. These practices catch hold. And this is the main problem that I see, not just, and I understand, to your point, if something happens on the international stage, it's going to have a way amplified effect, more effect than it maybe should have. But things like that are happening in our industry regularly. And because we have a lower threshold of intelligence and classical education, what have you, horse sense in the general population than ever before, these things are taking hold in mass waves. Just take something like leverage draw reins, for example. There's plenty of arguments, and I'm not interested to discuss whether draw reins are good or bad or whatever, but I know for sure it's not good for a little child who's only skilled enough to be riding short stirrup or small ponies to be jumping in them. And yet on recognized horse shows across our country, you see that every day. And these practices now, because we feel so entitled to our expert way of doing things in our little insular, very privileged society, which may be totally different than the Western world, these things which have no place in any kind of common sense horsemanship are everywhere. And they've become normalized. And that's my major concern, is less about the journalistic moments like the collecting ring at the Aachen show, or the Olympics, or Charlotte, or, even the ASPCA here, Jackie McConnell, that's just right down the road here, the, Tennessee walking horse gentleman who's, found guilty. Those are far less concerning to me than the practices that we now accept as experts, allowing these things to happen in our industry. When someone walks in off the street and they go, why is that pony's head, restricted when it's jumping? And does anybody worry about the safety of the child on top? These are my concerns.
I'm going to throw in a couple bits. So one is, at least to me, as far as the pentathlon thing, to me, smacking the horse wasn't the problem. The temper tantrum, I mean, it's not ideal. But to me, that isn't the big problem. But to me, I think promoting riding the horse when you don't have any understanding is, and so, I personally don't think it's sad that did they take it out altogether?
It's out, I think.
So the horse part is out. Now, could it have been done better and it could have been saved? Maybe. But to me, that isn't a sad thing, because I don't think it's good to promote riding the horse when you have that little understanding of it. We all have our own little things. I think I'm not alone, though, in that it wasn't the actual smack. Yes, there are the emotional horse welfare police I was mentioning that are going to be worried about the smack. To me, it's much bigger than that. And the other little piece I just wanted to say that I think it's kind of a little far back from what you said, but I do still think it's relevant to everything you guys are saying. And that is that just because someone is trying their best doesn't mean they are not abusing a horse. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, I totally agree that if someone is truly trying to learn and they're making mistakes, we shouldn't, chastise them for that or punish them for that. But also, just because someone thinks that they're doing their best and they're trying hard and they love their horse, doesn't mean that what they're doing with their horse is okay, whether that's their bid or whatever. There's a million different subjects, but that's the kind of person that is not looking for solutions. And that's exactly what I think is a huge part of the population that needs change, is all these people that have absolutely no idea that they're causing their horse any harm whatsoever. They love their horse, they're doing their best, that's good enough, right? For most people, I guess that's good enough, but there's a lot of bad stuff going on in those circles, Bad for horses, I think.
So, are y'all familiar with the concept of the golden prison? I did an interview with the world expert on equine gastric ulcer syndrome. There is a significant, overwhelming amount of research that proves that keeping horses in stalls is bad for them. They call the solution friends, forage, and freedom. And so most people, I would say, would believe that keeping horses in stalls is the elite way to handle. This is the horse with, there's a chandelier in my barn. What do you mean I'm abusing my horse? So education, I think, is the solution to all of that. I'm assuming when you say a person that thinks they're doing a good job, that we're not talking about a person that has an actual intention. We're more talking about a person who's guilty of ignorance. And maybe the results of their ignorance are catastrophic in certain ways. But if that's the actual problem, then to me, it always comes down to education. If I can educate a person out of this situation and now the horse is in a much better situation, I'm honestly not sure if the word abuse applies there. I don't know. I don't know, but I kind of think abuse and cruelty has to have a measure of intention in it. I don't know that just the result. I could drive a horse around in a trailer and he gets in a horrific trailer wreck, breaks his leg, and has to be euthanized. Was I abusive, or did just some bad stuff out of my control happen? So I don't know if it's as black and white as the results here are poor, thus the person is guilty of abuse. I really think all of this boils down to the educational side of it. So what you were talking about with roll cur and all of that, I'm not directly in the English world. I am more of a generalist. From my perspective, a lot of that stuff is getting much better, at least on the lower end of things. And I think where I see it most is at the peak. It's more dogmatic, and the people whose paychecks depend upon it are the last to let go. But I think the general horse person is becoming more and more aware that that stuff isn't good. And to me, there is again a mountain of evidence of all that is caused by things like roll curve behind the vertical riding. It's a significant part of what I teach in the bit stuff that I do and all of that. And so I think it's harder and harder to put your head in the sand and say that this is okay. From my understanding, and I know some things change back and forth over the last few years, but most of those larger governing bodies officially have rules outlawing that stuff. And the real problem is that the judges aren't actually following the rules. There was a pretty famous research paper done where some students went and watched all of the footage, and they came up with an equation. I think it was something like 75% of the time judges were more likely to reward roll cur rather than penalize it, even though it was specifically supposed to be penalized in the rules. So we have a lot of situations where governing bodies aren't following their own rules, or judges aren't doing that. That's not exclusive to the English world for sure. In reining, I don't know what the rule book says these days, but 20 years ago in reining, if your horse had its pole below the withers, you were going to be DQ'd for that. It was a major situation. Now they're all loping around with the nose between their knees, just as bad as any of the high level dressage people are doing. And again, I think that's a situation where if we as insiders held the governing body's feet to the fire a bit more and got the judges to do what they're supposed to do, then that stuff would change in 2 weeks. If you actually were excused from a dressage test every single
Yes, here we go, Daniel. We
Okay.
love where this
Okay.
conversation is going, by the way. Yay! You'll notice, Daniel, here that I have a horse with an American flag on its mane. And I wear an American flag around my neck whenever I'm on one of these because I've decided, here's been my experience. Stop me and tell me if you have had something similar. For years, actually, we've worked really hard to try to help assist and direct our national federation to care more about education and enforcement of rules and things like this. And there just comes to be a point in time where the ship feels like it's not going to turn around in time because there's so much money and power and just things involved that make it very difficult. I had a really long and interesting conversation with an FEI steward just very recently that spoke to the challenges of the stewards to enforce the rules on international competitions, because it's one thing if it's someone who doesn't matter, but it's a whole different thing if it's someone with importance that you've got. It is really hard job to be a steward at these big time horse shows with big money at play. It's also very hard for trainers to not do those things that get that kid across the line with a prize or a prize money check or whatever, because everything is such high stakes. And I'm sure that it's that way in the cutting or the reining world. I mean, we're talking about very expensive horses and big prize money, opportunities. So it feels like, I don't really even like to say grassroots, because I think grassroots is tied directly to top sport in any discipline. You have to have the most experienced involved in some way. It feels like in the equestrian world, because of these social license to operate things and because of the major power that the animal activists have, we're going to have to peel off away from our governing bodies and create new pockets that hopefully don't get canceled when theirs do, because it's not happening. At least that has also been the feedback from other much more powerful in the know people than myself, that there is literally no chance of getting our federation to turn around and do those things that you say need to be done. We are all in agreement that has to happen.
Unfortunately, I agree with you. I'm not, in my mind, the ship hasn't sailed just yet, or at least I don't mind twisting arms behind backs and watching people grimace a little bit. So, I mean, I think some lawsuits need to occur. I think actually the social license to operate, if those of us who really want to see change from the interim were wise, we could use that same stuff against them to point out the hypocrisies. I could say, like, within the bit rules of FEI and all, like, they need to burn the whole thing and start from scratch. It's the most convoluted, ridiculous. Like, I'm not sure if whoever came up with most of those rules knows anything about bits. Like, there are inconsistencies throughout that, and all are absurd things that are promoted, normalized, as you're saying. I could scientifically blow so many holes in that's actually bad, it's not even funny. And then things that would be good, like the bimetallic bits, galvanization, and all that stuff that's outlawed, would actually be extremely beneficial. So I think the whole shining light in dark corners, using this social license to operate in the attention, that can be a pretty powerful thing.
No, I'm so excited to hear you make that point about using the fire of the social license to operate to force change in our national federations, right? Or international federations. And that has exactly been our strategy. And not from really, I'm like kind of an emotional woo-woo kind of girl. You're going to just have to get used to it. I don't like fighting against it. I mean, I have done it for decades and I have not been successful, but I love collaborating on things and using energy from something like a negative to create a positive. And that this particular pickle that we find ourselves in, it really should be making our federations listen to people like us and get a little gumption behind making some changes. It doesn't feel so possible, but maybe with more collaboration and more interdisciplinary conversations, it could get there.
Absolutely.
It's also interesting that I've had multiple conversations with different people. We would be really interesting, Daniel, if you ever would like to jump onto one of our advisory panel meetings, that we formed a different society that's very deep with global people in multiple disciplines, not all sport equestrian, some more science based and things like that, but in multiple conversations with people that I deeply respect, there continues to be lots of dialogue around the pressures that equestrian professionals are under. And I 100% understand that. I've been there, done that, taken people to big horse shows, had to overextend myself to do that, needed to have clients that were happy. You know what? We all know that this is a very tricky business to be in. But again, it's one of these catch-22s where either governing bodies, which we see how well they're doing, governance is not fun. Like, it's just not, and it's impossible to do it completely well, and it's just grows into this huge monster. So I think we all feel pretty certain that we don't want more governance because it becomes increasingly complex and power struggle laden and what have you. But when the conversation is always around that there's no way around equine professionals to make better decisions because of the economic pressures that they're faced with, it starts to feel like the money that supports our industry, it can't be a closed circle, right? Like, there has to be some money coming in from organizations that go, what's amazing? When horses and humans get to work together, it develops people in a completely holistic way. It increases academic performance. It offers all of these career possibilities, because sport itself can be self-defeating because the goal is the prize. And you will always stretch yourself to win the prize. But that's what's fueling the whole system. And I don't know what the answer is, but when top people that I supremely adore and think are great horse people keep telling me that the decisions are being made by their peers because of economic pressure, what's the solution?
So to me, it falls short with the governing bodies and the judges. If the judges didn't reward the crap that needs to go away, then the trainers would respond, even the unethical ones. If Rolker didn't win anymore and it got you DQ'd, it would be gone in a month. If the Western pleasure horses doing the peanut roll thing were actually, or if they had to, lope out in an actual 3-beat deal, if all of these things that started as good ideas and we pushed it a little and pushed it a little and pushed it a little until it became a perversion of what the original intention was, if all of those things became heavily penalized by the judges, all of them would go away tomorrow, because the trainers are under pressure and
All right,
they
so
would
what are we
have
going
to
to do?
respond. It's the judges,
Well, so
and
here's
the
the
governing
thing.
bodies.
Yeah.
So
About judges, we should put it all on the judges. However, where do the judges come from? I mean, they came up through the system, so how do you get judges?
They didn't used to be that way. That's the thing. And I don't know how it is in the Western world, but it's not even just to the judging, but to people that sit in the governing bodies. When you get invited to a seat at the table, people that used to stand up for, let's just call it classical, old school standards, what have you, no longer stand up for those standards when they are in these ecosystems of governance, which are all ruled by money and power. And but the governing bodies, to Daniel's point, they have to realize that if they don't change their course, they are burying themselves under social license to operate. And that's exactly, I agree, Daniel, that's the point that we have to play to make them finally clean up their mess.
But to your point with the government, yeah, I don't want more rules and regulations and all of those things either. But as those organizations grow, we go from 3 volunteers to 8 professionals, and now we have interns, and it grows and grows and grows. Then it becomes a responsibility to protect the organization itself, and the mission statement of what originally started
Yes.
it gets lost. And that's just, it's a pattern. It's not exclusive to the horse business. It happens in every other aspect, including politics and the actual government and everything as well. So, again, I think it's the education of the people. If people in mass said, we're not gonna stand for roll cur, or we're gonna put a limit on the barrel horses, 3 pounds of glitter, no more. If you go 3 pounds 3 ounces, you can't run. If we made some real hard standards here. And I really love, I wield humor like a sword. When you make something look absurd, now argue against it. Go ahead. I please have at it. Best of luck to you, So if we handle them like that, maybe we'll get something to change.
Love that you said that. And I think I've told you about it, Tamara, and you will love this book, Daniel. You'll love it. It's called How Minds Change by David McRaney. And I recommend everybody fast forward and listen to chapter 10 first, because it talks about how the human mind is so plastic, right? We have the ability to change our thought process and our behavior before we can physically adjust on an evolutionary scale. Historically, humans only change their belief systems in their, framework of thought when environmental conditions become so challenging that they will die otherwise. And so in the horse world, if you want to draw a parallel there, I think we're as close to death of an industry as we've ever been historically. Whether that's founded or not, it is the case. The fact that our governing bodies continue to put their head in the sand or just push back against animal activist group rather than figuring out ways to say, like, explain to us exactly, PETA, how many pounds of glitter should we remove before you accept it? Except for in PETA's case, they don't believe that you should be able to sit on a horse, period, right? Like, that's pretty much the underlying thought. So you're maybe not going to win that battle. I have a really interesting conversation coming up with a group called Humane World today. Someone that reached out after the first event.
So I think that might actually be the Humane Society of the United States. They've just rebranded and changed their name. I think that might be what
exactly.
that is.
I think exactly. Yeah. Here's what seems good about it. The woman that reached out to me that is in charge of the equine department is a dressage rider herself. That's good. Someone that doesn't mind sitting on and training with horses, right? If there are some organizations that exist for the benefit of humane treatment of animals that are reasonable enough to understand that if human activities with these animals are canceled, the life for these horses is going straight down the toilet, right? There is no money to take care of them or places for them to live, or this will be a major issue, right? So if we can get these, what I might call reasonably conservative animal groups to help us connect to the more extreme ones, perhaps there might be some, I don't think that useful dialogue will happen between horseback riding industry professionals and PETA. I find that hard to imagine. Maybe it will. What do you think, Daniel?
I would say the Humane Society of the United States is pretty radical on that end. They're probably more clever at hiding it than some of the others, and they've done some things like when they have a radical agenda, they will fund a smaller group that will actually carry it out. The Humane Society of the United States is the most successful fundraising of all of those groups. The Humane Society of the United States literally would choose extinction over continuation of what they're going to call exploitation of animals. And they have, if you want to look it up, there's a pretty famous deal on this called the spiral horned oryx, which is a type of African antelope that was imported to Texas game ranches, and it became the most successful captive breeding program in the history of the world. They brought them back. There were more of these in Texas than there were in Africa, to the point where now they're repopulating Africa. And the Humane Society of the United States got laws passed to shut that down, and literally wanted all of the ones in Texas to be euthanized rather than any of them to be hunted. And so, and I was personally involved in Hurricane Katrina down here, and some of that stuff, and I've seen the camera crews of them filming the dog drowning with a bunch of useless people in a boat who did nothing to stop the dog from drowning. They just wanted the footage so that they could then use it to fundraise. They actually had, in specific to Hurricane Katrina, the Humane Society of the United States, I believe, used that kind of footage, raised over $100 million through TV commercials, and the Louisiana state legislature had to pass a law forcing them to actually spend at least 10% of it in Louisiana to help the animals that they used to raise the money to. So I would not class them as one of the good ones.
No, I think it is a time where we can potentially, in my view anyway, there's not more harm in having that conversation than in running away from it, because it was a good conversation. Sure. We applaud your efforts. We love what you're doing. We love that education and ethics and blah, blah, blah is at the root of it. It's around our views on animal abuse currently. And I think that we might be interesting because we sit in Tennessee, and the Horse Protection Act, as we all know, is about to be a blanket statement for the way that the walking horse world has had to be regulated. At least that's my understanding. So I'm really guarded for sure, but also very intrigued to understand what actually, is there anything that our industry could do that would make y'all look good, right? Like, that's really, at the end of the day, it's all about checking boxes. How can our industry help y'all show that you are making your mission happen and making the world a more humane place for animals? If that's not on the table to discuss those kinds of things, then nobody wastes their time. And then you just hope that the, litigators can sort it out.
So let me be clear. I would certainly encourage you to have that conversation. I'm not saying you shouldn't go talk to those people. They're useless. That's not what I mean whatsoever. So I think those conversations need to happen. It would be nice if everybody was an adult on both sides. Like, it's not like those of us that find PETA and the Humane Society of the United States to be wackos with a radical agenda. It's not like I'm jumping up and down going, no, I have a right to beat my horse with a 2x4 until blood comes out of his ear. I'm not like for inhumane treatment of horses, right? I disagree with what that might look like in practice. I completely agree with you, and I love that you were talking about the economic value of horses. To me, it's a law of the universe that anything that comes along that economically devalues horses is bad for horses and will ultimately harm them on a much larger scale. And I think, like some of these laws, the Horse Protection Act and some of the things, I have a huge fear on that, because the requirements of them having inspectors at shows and rodeos and things like that. And yes, I know it's not rodeos yet, but it is a slippery slope. Like that's definitely going to grow. In 3 years, it will be. So that's exactly the way that horse slaughter ended in the United States. There was a requirement for USDA inspectors so that it would be humane. And then they simply defunded the USDA inspectors. Now the inspectors aren't there, and de facto the plant can't run because the inspectors aren't there and they're required there by law. So if they get it where this show can't happen without the USDA inspector, and we roll for 5 or 6 years and everything's okay, and then the inspectors get defunded, the whole industry just closed because nothing can happen without the inspectors there. That's like a pin in a grenade. That scares me so bad it's not even funny, because that pin is there to pull years down the road and boom, we're toast. So again, it's not that I want bad things to happen or I want that to be okay, but that particular mechanism has already had catastrophic results. We also have the head USDA
Totally.
veterinarian in charge of APHIS, Dr. Aaron Reiner, who is, by the way, right now under congressional investigation for the way that he's written rules for APHIS. He has said to the Tennessee Walker Group, I have multiple confirmation of people that were in the room, that under the amendments to the Horse Protection Act, the PAST Act, and all of that stuff, he personally, he's a primate vet, by the way, not a horse vet, he can see any act of riding a horse as being soaring. So if we're talking of governing bodies and things like this done so that things are humane, we have got a radical running that right now who would be most happy to say nobody can ever ride a horse again if he ever gets the clear field to take that run and do it. We're a lot closer to the edge than people realize.
And is that just, yes, exactly. Is that just the kind of emphasis or mission of one person? Or is it like a situation? Explain, just because I don't know any of that backstory.
Okay, so what happens? He runs the APHIS part of it. So a law passes, like the Horse Protection Act or the PAST Act. Those are 17 pages long or something. But in the USDA and APHIS, they are going to write the policies and procedures that their agents are going to follow enforcing this Horse Protection Act. That document's going to be 347 pages long. And nobody voted on it. Congress didn't. Like, a person gets to write it because they have the authority, and then that goes out. And who writes it, how it gets written, so far, all of the legislation I'm aware of that has come in the last 10 years has actually been written directly by the animal rights groups, who then lobbied a congressman or whatever to sponsor the bill. Then the bill goes in. And the PAST Act, for instance, in 2016, they have since gotten enough flack that they've changed this, but there was a paragraph in there that named specifically, so we're talking about abuse and cruelty, any act of causing pain to a horse would now be a criminal act of abuse or cruelty. And on the surface, that sounds good. Like, who wants people to go cause pain to horses, right? That would be terrible, until my vet has to pull a Coggins test, which involves sticking the horse in the neck with a needle, which is going to intentionally cause pain to the horse, or vaccinations come around, or my farrier needs to look for a hoof abscess, or I just want this horse to go through a pre-purchase exam, and when the vet tweaks his knee, oh, I think I found something. Let me do that again. I'm now intentionally going to cause pain to this limb to see if I have a problem with it. Like, we do things all the time that intentionally cause pain to horses. Can you breed a mare and then expect when she foals that she's not going to be in pain for a while when she foals that baby? Nope. Well, now you're criminally abusive and in violation of the PAST Act because you did something with forethought that you knew was intentionally going to cause pain to that animal at some point. So we have to be a lot more aware and a lot more careful of the things they're slipping into these bills, because on the surface, some of it looks good, but the results of it can be absolutely catastrophic depending on who gets to enforce what's going to happen there. So, okay, I feel like I've been on a soapbox for a little while now here. I'll shut up.
That reminds me of kind of the same thing I said about the pentathlon thing. If we're writing rules around pain, yeah, we're going to miss the mark. Things are going to get misinterpreted. Silly. It's very clear, we all agree, rules and regulations aren't the answer. Real education is. But how to actually do that is a whole other animal. How to get the education out there and how to, I don't know. I mean, should there be rules and regulations more? I mean, I know we're saying these rules and regulations are too much. No, not good. Is there a middle ground of rules and regulations, or is it, oh, let's just keep putting the pamphlets out there until it makes a difference? And I am specifically thinking of, just to put it in context, when I am thinking of who needs the pamphlet and they're never going to pick it up, is the hunter jumper world. At those shows, like you were mentioning, whether it's rated or unrated, there's stuff going on that is completely normalized that is such BS that, is it abuse? Is it cruelty? I don't really care what word we use. It shouldn't keep going.
Here's what is not being done in our country that's being done in other countries, and our country is now starting to influence, it's creating the influence for other countries to pick up, in my opinion, our poor practices. I don't know how it is in the Western world. In our world, there is no licensure or certification required at all to be a professional. You just check the box on your federation card, and that has been the fight that we've been in with the USEF for so long, because you can't get your hair cut or your fingernails done without someone that has a license to operate in a fairly low risk kind of industry, right? This is not the case in other parts of the world. There is an organization called the International Group for Equestrian Qualifications, which is run by experts and longtime people in the industry to uphold best practices for education and ethics, which allow horse professionals, dressage and jumping, to become certified. And I think lots of other disciplines actually as well, therapeutic riding and things like that, by showing that they have some form of education or test taking or what have you. Is that perfect? It's not perfect, but our federation has never been interested in that kind of professionalization of the industry, because it would drastically cut back on the number of people that would be allowed to operate and draw in money. And that is one of those things, like Daniel says about the judging, that could change overnight. And I don't think that it has to be required. I think it should be required if they want to turn their ship around. And that doesn't mean that you can't grandfather people in and all those kinds of things. There's lots of organizations that do that. But what should definitely be available in our country is the possibility to have an international standard of licensure, certification, trainer's passport, what have you, that other people have access to. And I have the feeling that our federation has intentionally withheld that, because when you don't know, you have to pay. And that's what we've done, is become the United States of America liaison with the International Group for Equestrian Qualification. So finally, there is a place that you can get certified in our field if you want to. No one's saying you have to, but otherwise you would have had to gone through the damn BHS. We're Americans. We have a whole different set of issues that we deal with. We still deal with horses and humans, but why in the world shouldn't our federation care about that? Do you guys have any of that similar issue?
Yes, they're really, I guess there are a few governing bodies for that sort. We have the Certified Horsemanship Association. One of the things I was thinking about there is, like we have the AFA, the American Farriers Association, for certification for that. Almost any time you set something up, you wind up with an opposing force to it. And I think that just is the nature of things. But I think people having the option to go through that, have some kind of certification, I'm all for education in whatever form we can get and whatever tends to promote that. One of the things that I kind of see as a pretty strong trend is that, to me, we have a very, very rapidly growing base of semi-professional horsemen. So you had kind of mentioned about like these amateurs that have a bunch of money and can go buy a really high level horse, but there are a lot of people that are in this world in some form that are kind of, maybe it starts as a hobby and they get a little higher level of it, and then they realize they can make a little money with it, and it becomes like a little side hustle or something. And maybe they've trained 4 horses and now they're giving lessons, or they were trimming their own horses and now they're trimming some horses for a few clients, and that sort of thing has grown exponentially in my mind, in the last 15 years, I have tons of contacts now that I would kind of class in that semi-professional lane. I think that's kind of good and bad, because those people are generally educating themselves, so they're going to typically get to a level above the average amateur. At the same time, I don't think they tend to get to the real level of what I would class as a professional. I've kind of complained about that a little bit. Like I spent 6 years apprenticing under other trainers, and I'm sorry, but if you go to a 6-week course with a clinician or whatever, you're not a horse trainer yet. Like, it takes more than that. So I kind of think we've got, there'll have to be a balance developed with something like that. But absolutely anything that brings about more education and more desire for education, I'm for it.
Yeah. Education is the solution for
Did I
everything
lose
if
y'all
we can
again?
just get folks engaged in it.
I know one of my issues with certifications and things historically has been that the certifications that are available, in my experience, which isn't that deep with them, I haven't gone that deep into them, but the ones I'm aware of, they almost promote that semi-professional that Daniel is talking about. Because anybody can go pass their stupid test and get a certification, which is why exactly. I mean, when USHJA trainer certification came out, I was like, what a joke. Like, I'm not spending my money on that. Like, I wouldn't even consider wasting my time.
Well,
on
that's where I think it has to be, you have to be able to showcase your own skills, right? And so the pathway into the trainer certification that will be available shortly through USES is that you can't even begin the education until you have passed your rider certification at 90 centimeters jumping and first level dressage with written and practical tests. Then you can begin an education, which is done over a period of time, mostly remotely, but then with in-person testing. It has to be a real education, because the quote unquote pay to get another card or membership, basically a member of the United States Hunter Jumper Association Trainer Certification Program. That's what you are. You're not a certified trainer. But what happens a lot with governing bodies is that they want to own all of the products, and they barely have the bandwidth to govern the sport and create all the rules and regulations and do all of the what do you call it, secretarial work, right? They are not the people that are necessarily qualified or have the bandwidth to create education. And that's been my argument from the beginning, with even like an organization like UDJC that puts on a really great competition venue or competition platform. Competition and education need to be separate, because when you start educating for competition, you're always going to cut the important things when it comes to what you need that result to be, and to keep people whatever. So I think they have to be very separate, which is why the way we've created ours is as an educational institution that offers certifications in a little fun competition format, but it will never be a competition-based organization, because that and education do not line up in my experience.
So I think that's a good way to put that. When the only goal is the horse show, you do just start checking boxes. What do I, did I check the box to go do this level at this horse show? And it's not like you're saying, a complete education. It's not a complete picture. And then it just promotes, I don't know. I mean, I guess promoting going up levels is not wrong, but it's not complete,
Yeah, totally. I think that there's a difference between riding horses with competition being the goal, and the only way that you are assessing your progress is by the results of competition, versus an education that sets you up to be, advancing through skills that should then at some point be tested by how you perform at a competition. But they're just not one and the same, education and competition.
what's tough is, like the hunter jumper world, and I'll keep picking on that one because I can, but they could hear what we're saying and be like, yeah, we do education. Yeah, we care about horsemanship. Yeah, like to me, that's the biggest, hardest thing to figure out is like, there's so many people that think that what their organization is giving them is that. And it's like, no, you don't even know. I think I said this in my last episode. You don't know you're wearing blinders. It's tough.
I think that is probably the biggest piece that has to change to eliminate any pressure from animal welfare activists at all, is the education, not requiring, but providing education to horse owners at a low accessible point and encouraging that so that everyone continues to have the opportunity to benefit from horses, and horses get to benefit from being taken care of by humans. I mean, it goes both ways, but the educational part, when it's presented correctly, I think there's very few organizations that can argue against how that is cruel, because learning about another species and learning how to interact in a harmonious way that benefits both, those are lessons that make better humans, right? These are now humanitarian things that we're talking about and not just hobbies, leisure activities. I think that the whole feeling is that we take animals way too lightly and we don't appreciate what they really are. But if you can showcase that there's an incredibly in-depth education around all of these things and that you gain privileges as you move through it, that's a very different topic of conversation than, and what we all talk about. There's no reason why that can't be incorporated into a competition format. There's no reason why the federation can't shift and make those adjustments. They just don't want to.
Well,
I think we've lost Daniel.
I think he's just a goner.
I know. That was a really wonderful conversation. Really good.
I think we kind of just naturally made it through pretty much everything I wanted to talk about there. I hope you enjoyed the show. Visit tamaraleebarrett.com for more info and links to our socials. Remember to click follow or subscribe, rate the show, and share with a friend. Until next time, happy horsing.